Hey, how you doing? Trying out the, I would say new, but it's not a new product, the Osmo. The Zenmuse X3 camera. And we're walking a route that we used to walk all the time. We would always start out over there, the former site of YJ's. It's now Verdant Ceramics Gifts, and the place on the corner is for lease. Let's just say that I miss YJ's. And we're in an area that's known as the Kansas City Crossroads Arts District, which I believe started actually in the 1960s. This was an area that was mostly known for industrial purposes. I believe in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it accommodated automobiles, mostly auto parts, automobile dealers, and that grew out of a fact that this area started out as what would you say, the carriage district. Get out of the way of. Yep. And that was, it's south of downtown, located pretty close to downtown. That's where people would bring their horses. There'd be all the livery stables down here. And we're on Film Row. This was a major distribution point for the Midwest region for all materials involving movies from Hollywood. And there's some stars here of some local people who started out in this area, grew up here, like Joan Crawford, you know, Hollywood stars. Apologize for the wind. Jean Harlow. There's a building there, like, doesn't look like it's changed from the 1920s. And it's, I don't know if it's being used for storage. I haven't seen anybody go in there. It's kind of neglected. It's sort of sad. A lot of times when we do this, I let my doggies play over there, but we're short on time. But with the art scene taking over this area, they built the major, they call it Kaufman Performing Arts Center, and that's where the ballet and the symphony orchestra now play. Basically black tie arts. Walking down the middle of the street to socially distance. But this area has a pretty interesting history. I believe it gets its name from the crossroads of the Jefferson Highway and the National Old Trails Road, which cross each other here in this area. Oops. Come on, Jimmy. Come on. And I guess the story goes that, Jimmy, how do I feel about you crossing? There you go. Talking to the critters. Sorry, forgot to introduce the critters. The black one here is Stella. She's a Skipper Key mix. And the brown one is Jimmy. He's a Doberman Shepherd mix. And both were shelter dogs that we adopted. sort of neglecting them on this. But when the artists started coming in here and being a part of the neighborhood, they talked to the business people, had a meeting with like the Chamber of Commerce, and they asked them what this area is called, or why is it called the Crossroads, and they didn't really know. They said, oh, it's always been the Crossroads. It's like the Crossroads of Kansas City. That's what they thought. And so it isn't a proven, it's more a theory than an actual fact that this is the Crossroads because of the crossroads of the two major I was going to say intercontinental, but two major highways that came through here. Jefferson Highway, which goes from Winnipeg, Canada to New Orleans, Louisiana, and the National Old Trails Road, which ran from New York City to Los Angeles. And both of these roads have ties to Route 66 because Route 66 was laid on the beds of both of these old auto trail routes. And I just realized I didn't bring my batteries. Hope I don't run out. We're about to come to the crossroads, the two roads where this area gets its name. And as far as artists go, I mean, this was an area full of car dealers, things related to automobiles. And you know, they started moving out in the 60s, moving out to the suburbs, like everything, moving away from downtown. You know, most people that were buying cars were living out in the suburbs, so they'd move the car lots out there. You know, places like Metcalf, Nolan Road, places like that. And so that left a lot of these spaces kind of empty, being used as warehouses, storage, light industrial use, and unfortunately crime. A lot of homeless settled in here. And you know, by the 1980s you could pick up a building, my dad said, for a whole building for like $20,000, which is amazing. But also kind of sad too. Well, where there's cheap rent, often you'll find artists. And it started with an artist who, all right, go this way. But this is not the crossroads itself, but this is one of the roads that makes the crossroads. We don't actually go to the intersection. I'm not going to walk right over there today. But there was an artist by the name of Jeff Leedy who was a professor at the Art Institute, among other things. Lots of accolades, accomplished artist. He wanted cheap space. He was driven out of what was then considered a Bohemian district, which was Westport. You know, typical pattern. It got gentrified. East Coast, West Coast developers decided that people were paying for it was not enough. They should pay New York City, LA prices for it. And this was back in the 60s and 70s when gentrification ruined places like Greenwich Village in New York. All right, here is Southwest Boulevard, which this portion is the Jefferson Highway, and the actual Crossroads is down that way, about 2 blocks. It's where the Jefferson Highway and the National Old Trails cross. So yeah, gentrification kind of ruins everything. unfortunately. I mean, there's a point where it's good, and then there's a point where it goes too far and drives everybody out and only leaves like one class of people and takes an area that was generally open-minded and multicultural and turns it into something a little more, I don't know how you would say it. But, so, Jeff Leedy came up here looking for a place and essentially bought a whole building. I believe he bought it. And that is actually right over there. Not that building in the corner, but about 2 or 3 buildings in. And I always think this is a beautiful, layered view looking into downtown. And he turned it into an artist loft. I believe he lived there and had studio space there. And pretty soon, it wasn't so much artists, it was photographers mostly. This area became the district where all the photographers would buy up the buildings so they could have wide open studio space. And I believe it was the photographers who kind of followed Jim Leedy's lead, haha, be good. And then the artists kind of followed, but not until this kind of thing started happening in the 70s and 80s. And it wasn't until really the 1990s and 2000s that artists started pouring into this district, mainly 2000s. 1990s, there were a few. It was starting to form, but they were spread out all over town. There were a lot in the West Bottoms and stuff. The West Bottoms was supposed to be the big arts district, but the West Bottoms, another industrial area, has some notorious problems, one of which is flooding. And so the West Bottoms time is starting to come. It's become kind of a antique district now. And that's sort of passing, and it's known for its haunted houses. Anyway, Leedy's studio is about 2 blocks that way. Come on, doggies. Oops. Here's a favorite of mine. Town topic. Town topic. Anyway, there's things of interest in this district. One of which is the old TWA headquarters over here. That's that red and white looking building there. Oh, I'm neglecting to say, this was kind of a district where people would come and flop. They would bring their horses here. I'm sure back in the day it didn't smell very good with all the stables. But right here, very badly backlit, is the old Kansas City police, not headquarters, but it was like a branch police office, and mainly it was a jail. Now, just south of here, in the southern border of the Crossroads, is the railroad tracks at Union Station. And this is an area where people would come. Back in the day, they'd come by train, and if they'd say, hey, where's a good cheap place I could sleep for the night, I don't have a train until next morning, they'd say, come up here. And there's a few hotel flop places that you can just lay your head down and It's a little story that my dad told me about this, actually. And that jail there is where Ernest Hemingway, when he worked for the Kansas City Star, would come in, and I believe he asked the jailer if he could sit in the cells with some of the prisoners and gather interesting stories. So that's kind of neat. And this is the TWA building, old headquarters for TWA. The rocket is the Moonliner. It's it's not the original. It was made and put up there, in the early to mid 2000s. The original, there were two of them. They were made by Howard Hughes to give to his buddy Walt Disney, who was from this area. And Howard Hughes, of course, had TWA headquarters here. And one rocket in the 1950s went to Tomorrowland in Walt Disneyland in Anaheim, California. And the other rocket, I do believe, came here and sat on top of the TWA headquarters. And eventually the TWA headquarters moved. And this became like the stewardess training. I think that's how it ended its days. They trained stewardesses here. Anyway, I'm just looking at that. Wow, look at that blue sky. All right, I'm gonna hit the stop-start button here and go get my batteries because my car is right around the corner, and continue this on. And I'll tell the story of my dad and his misadventures here in the Kansas City Crossroads in the mid-50s. All right, I've hit restart. And this is where we finished. And I was going to tell the story of my dad. I can stay focused. Lots of construction going on down here. This area is very busily being gentrified into a residential area. Pretty soon, typical story, artists won't even be able to afford to live down here. Again, I apologize for that wind. I've tucked the mic into my shirt. I haven't been able to find a good dead cat cover for the microphone, these Sony lapel mics. Anyway, so my dad told the story. I believe it was 1954, he said. And he had joined the Air Force, and I believe he went to basic training. Now, he'll probably correct me if I'm wrong. And after basic training, they sent him to his tech school. And in those days, when you joined the Air Force, you didn't join the Air Force, you joined the Army Air Force. And they had just separated a few years earlier. And they made all the recruits line up and count off by twos. 1, 2, 1, 2. And for instance, they say, all right, number 1, you guys are Army. Number 2, you guys are Air Force. So that's how my dad got in the Air Force. And so he was transferring by train to his more or less permanent station. Because, you know, at that time he was training to be a crew chief. A crew chief takes, I think they had a 6-year enlistment because it took 2 years to train them. And so for 2 years you were living in your base. And I believe his base was in Illinois. So he was coming up from Texas by train, and the train stopped here in Kansas City. You know, the U.S. government probably bought the cheapest tickets they could. And so he probably had a layover of a day or so. And I think they gave him billeting money or whatever. So my dad pops out of Union Station off the train. You know, never been here before. And he asks, where can I find a cheap room that isn't necessarily nasty? And they said, go up there a few blocks to the north of the station and you'll find a room. So he went up there and he looked around. He was finding a room. Well, I guess they didn't really tell him that the neighborhoods were rough. I mean, this area was bad in the 50s. And he got robbed. And they took his wallet. So I don't know how he spent that night. Maybe he spent it in the station if they allowed him. But that was his initial experience with Kansas City. Not a pleasant one. And the funny thing is, kind of don't understand, because he's not from Kansas City. His family is actually from Florida, New Jersey. I don't understand why we decided to settle in Kansas City if that was his experience, but oh well, whatever. So anyway, we're walking north on Baltimore. Baltimore is a pretty picturesque street. It's not one of the main downtown streets. And, you know, they're doing a lot of construction down here. Loft apartments. They just completed this big hotel. And really just completed a really big hotel right here. This goes into Power and Light District. Come on, Doggies. Let's look down Baltimore here. That's looking south towards Union Station. You can see Liberty Memorial way off in the distance there. I do forget this particular gimbal is unique in that it has zoom, but it doesn't zoom very well live. It's kind of jerky. You sort of have to stop the recording and then hit the zoom. I guess I should do that. I don't know. Well, I'm talking about something that's way off in the distance. It's not a grand zoom, but it's better than nothing. Anyway, that's the new Lowe's 1,000-room hotel, a big legacy project, I'm sure done with city dollars, because they're really trying to develop the downtown Kansas City. After the 1960s into the 1970s was not a place you wanted to come at night. There wasn't much down here. It was mostly just office spaces, and there were a lot of drug dealers on every corner, and and especially bad around the old Quality Hill neighborhood. Again, I apologize for that wind. When you walk around tall buildings, you get the wind tunnel effect, especially on a day that's already windy. But Quality Hill was one of the oldest neighborhoods, and it was supposed to be where all the rich people lived. And sorry, I gotta untangle my silly dog here. Come on, Jim. Step out. But by the mid part of the 20th century into the 1970s, it was one of the worst neighborhoods. High crime, lots of derelict buildings, which is a shame because all those buildings were beautiful old Victorian structures. Come on, dogs, we gotta get fast. And they redeveloped that in the 1980s, and now it's a nice neighborhood again, sort of. Still a lot of leftovers from the old days. There's I-70. We're crossing over I-70. Whoops. Into the downtown loop. There we go. I-70. That heads east towards St. Louis. And that heads west towards Topeka and Colorado and all the way through Kansas. And the reason they're building all the hotels and stuff here is because all the convention centers. And that's also the reason why the Power and Light District exists. A friend of mine said, Power and Light is a place where tourists come to go look at other tourists. And I think he's right, because the company that redeveloped it with taxpayer dollars, actually, they still have taxpayer dollars supporting it, is a company that's famous for building these kind of developments in downtown areas. And they sort of make it look like the old part of town. If you're lucky, they might keep a few buildings around. But in general, they kind of rip everything out and build new. Sort of a postmodern thing. Now this is the building that gives this district its name. It's the Power and Light Building, or the old Kansas City Power and Light, which they still exist, but that was their headquarters. And I believe it's one of these buildings that was built by the cement company that Pendergast owned. And a lot of downtown Kansas City has these cement structures. They're beautiful, and they've been built to last a long time. But they were also built to enrich Pendergast and his company. I could be wrong about that. Please correct me if I am. I believe this structure over here, which is the old convention center, this old Art Deco structure. Hold on, let me try that zoomy thing again. There you go. What do you think of that? That's beautiful. It works. That's the old, and it's a beautiful Art Deco structure. It's the old convention center. It's beautiful on the inside. It's still being used for a lot of things. But I believe that's another one of those cement masterpieces, concrete masterpieces. Anyway, and as you can see, these didn't exist a couple of years ago. They came with the, so you know where you are. You're in the Power and Light District of Kansas City. They came with the redevelopment. And that's the Power and Light District proper down there, with anchored by the Sprint Center, the Sprint Arena, which, I don't know, are they still calling it Sprint Arena now that it's T-Mobile? It's probably now T-Mobile Arena. I don't know. I'm gonna walk against the light because there's nobody coming. You know, with the beer flu situation, almost said another word there. Things haven't been as busy. Here's one of the older hotels. I believe, what is this, the President? Historic Hilton President Hotel. Historic Hotels of America. Yep, I gotta watch how I'm holding the gimbal. It's shooting a little high there. You can actually see my big gimbal in the reflection. This is a brand new development. I watched them build it. Used to come down here a lot when I worked at Channel 4 as a photographer. Mostly wood on the inside in it, I believe, and I think it's steel, wood, non-load bearing walls, and then all of this fancy stonework is pretty much facade, which you get a good wind down here and that facade will be all over the street. And I noticed there's a new PT's coffee right there. PT's is from Topeka. Their coffee roaster. And they're kind of becoming a regional coffee powerhouse. I don't know how I feel about PT's coffee. I haven't tried it in a while. My favorite is Broadway. and head rush. All right, doggies, come on. Come on. Come on. All right, doggies, sit. 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 Stella, you're setting off the car alarm there, crazy dog. All right, come on. Come on, Jimmy. Nothing to freak out about. All right, here's kind of a Kansas City icon over here, the meal box sign. I'm gonna try that zoomy thing again. So here we go. Love this sign, mule balk. There was a movie called Prime Cut, which is a very bad stereotype movie of the Kansas City Mafia. And Sissy Spacek in it, and I think Lee Marvin. And there's a famous scene in the Mule Balk Motel. Well, the reason I mention that is because, and the reason I love that scene, even though the rest of the movie is pretty funny in the worst ways, but the reason I love that scene is because it shows what the service was like in the Mule Balk. And it was a grand place. And the restaurant, man, you'd have like, I think in the movie they had 4 or 5 people serving them, and I think that was the point, because Sissy Spacek's character was a poor girl who was sold into sex slavery. Yes, this was made back in late 60s, 1970, I don't know, I have to look it up. A lot of people haven't heard of that movie, but they should watch it, at least for the gee whiz value of what Kansas City at least looked like back then. Anyway, we're walking into the Power and Light District itself. I mean, we're sort of been on the border of it. Stella, you're wrapping around me. And we're getting across the street. A great addition to the Kansas City area is the streetcars. And when I get across the street, out of danger's way, we'll look over here at the Midland Theater, which is now a music venue. It's an old vaudeville theater, and very beautiful on the inside. And I believe the term for the style of theater that it is atmospheric. And atmospheric, they mimic like you're sitting inside, you're sitting outdoors, and there's like clouds painted on the ceiling. I believe they would have twinkling stars when the lights would go down. Beautiful on the inside. I believe that's where I saw and waited in line in 1980 for The Empire Strikes Back, back when it was a movie theater. Anyway, I'm real close to this building. It's kind of become an iconic structure. This is the headquarters city of H&R Block, where they do your income taxes, one of the biggest income tax preparers in the United States. And this is their world headquarters that was built a few years ago. I haven't walked down here in quite a while, and so there's a lot of new things here. Like Meshuggah Bagels has a store down here. And now I can smell the smells of grilled food. I know I'm not pointing this, hitting the lighting area where it lights up. It's kind of backlit down here. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, here's Power and Light District, the central part of it. Now, we're not allowed to walk with dogs or cameras, two things, inside the Power and Light District itself, inside the main concert area. And actually, they're pretty janky about people, professional photographers, being on their sidewalks. They've been given a contract by the city. At one time, we were shooting a fire, actually a fire in this parking garage right here. And we were standing on the corner right there. Now, this may have changed, but this was, I don't know, probably about 2015 or so. And something was on fire in the parking garage. I can't remember what. And all the news crews set up shop right there on the corner, on the sidewalk. Let me point down to the sidewalk. And an official from Power and Light District told us to get off the sidewalk. We're not allowed to be on their sidewalk. The city gave them exclusive rights, so they own even the sidewalks. And no cameras are allowed on Power and Light grounds. So we literally had to stand in the street here, and the police and the fire people didn't close down the street. It was an interesting exchange. You can tell I'm my opinion is sort of mixed about Power and Light. I mean, on the one hand, they did develop and improve an area, but on the other hand, they've taken a lot of city subsidies to do it, still taking the city subsidies, and I don't know. We always have to be careful crossing the parking garage here. All right, now, this is a shame over here. This building, although kind of plain looking, for a long time was the Kansas City School District headquarters, and now they're demolishing it. Let me do the zoomy thing and talk about it a little. Let me get up there first. There's our view of downtown from 13th and Grand. I don't know what the name of that building is, and I guess this is my lament for the loss of it. I used to have the Kansas City Library in the first floor, and I remember 1955, this beautiful googie structure inside, and all the hardwood and everything. It's beautiful. I hope they saved some of that. But the rest of the building was the headquarters for the Kansas City School District, which they didn't need that much space, and it was very inefficient for them. And I'm sure the building was never updated and very inefficient, needed a lot of repair, so down it comes. Because we got bigger and better things to build, and I'm not happy about it at all. So I guess that's that for that. I hate to even look at it, so I'll just remember it as it was. A lot of people didn't like the building. That's part of its problem. But that was because of negligence. The building had a lot of potential. And there were a lot of old buildings down here too. Mostly, people would... Jimmy. Crazy dog, crazy dog. Unfortunately, paying more attention to this than I am to my dogs, and so poor Jimmy. I told him not to wrap around things, and he did. He wrapped around that sign and knocked it down. That's what it was. But anyway, I was saying that a lot of people have a bad habit of buying up property as an investment, and the city would let them do it, and they would usually start out by gutting it. They would take out all the copper and make as much money off the scrap value of the building, and there goes the air conditioning units, and you know, to reinstall electrical in these buildings you'd have to spend $1 million for what, maybe $20,000 worth of scrap. And they would sit on them forever and ever and let them sit empty, let homeless people move into them. The city would allow them to do it because, you know, property rights, I guess. And then eventually they might get lucky and developers will come along and buy them out for a lot of money and build things like this. We call it the hockey puck. It's the Sprint Arena, but I need to update my, it's now the T-Mobile Center because T-Mobile has just bought up Sprint. Sprint is a company that started here in Kansas and was headquartered here in the Kansas City area. Now I'm going to risk everything here. I won't be here long enough for the security guards to notice. Now here's the Power and Light District where they hold all the team rallies and stuff. And one of the things I do like is they host a lot of local bands here. Give them a big, decent venue to play in. Come on, doggies. Now, I'm going to cross the street. Normally when I do this walk, it doesn't really matter, but when I do this walk with the dogs, we actually go down, what is this street? 4th Street, 14th Street. I should know my streets. 14th Street here, through the heart of the Power and Light District. However, we're just going to settle for looking at it because I talked about my desire to want to do something on local Kansas City Civil War history. And there's something that's really significant that happened here. And actually in the history of the Civil War, it led to one of the more notorious incidents in the history of this area and the history of the Civil War history. A lot of people may have heard of William Quantrill. I believe he was actually born up north. He wasn't born in the South. But he was somebody who had bad luck, and he came out to this area to come out and teach in Lawrence, Kansas in the 1850s, in a time that was very unsettled. And because he had bad luck and teachers don't make that much money, he got into some bad things like being a horse thief and a general all-round robber or whatever. And when the Civil War came along, he started a notorious band of raiders. They visioned themselves as like the Confederate Robin Hoods. And their idea was to rob from the Union Yankee invaders to help feed the poor Confederate local citizens. Well, that was here in Missouri, and it was Missouri versus Kansas. Kansas was free state, Missouri was slave state. Though Missouri was a slave state, it never joined the Confederacy. The governor was pro-Confederate, but the legislature, which I believe they were packed with a lot of German immigrants, or represented a lot of German immigrants, didn't want any part of the rebel cause. And I believe the governor stole the treasury, part of the militia that was loyal to him, and went down south to Arkansas. And meanwhile, the Civil War still raged along the border. It was a lot of partisan fighting. It was generally Jayhawks versus bushwhackers. The Missouri faction were the bushwhackers. The Kansas faction were the Jayhawks. And William Quantrill came to lead a faction. Anyway, I'll read some of this to you. It's Union prison collapse. On this spot stood the prison a makeshift prison that the Union Army set up to hold people who were loyal to the bushwhackers. And this is very near here at 1425 Grand Avenue. During the Civil War, a tragedy occurred that was to intensify the ferocious hatred of the border guerrillas for the Union forces. Under Union General Ewing's orders, the guerrillas' women were imprisoned in a large 3-story brick building owned but not then occupied by artist George Caleb Bingham. About 2 o'clock on Friday, August 14, 1863, the weakened building collapsed, injuring many of the female inmates. Christy McCorkle Kerr, Susan Selvey Vandiver, Armenia Selvey, and Josephine Anderson, sister of Bloody Bill Anderson, were killed. Also, many female relatives of the men with Quantrill were injured. Mary Anderson, Armenia Whitsett Gilvey, Molly Grinstaff, and Nanny Harris, all injured, had close relatives with Quantrill and the younger brothers. You know, the James gang, the younger brothers, Jesse James. On the news of the tragedy reaching Quantrill's men in the brush, they were wild. Also on August 18th, General Ewing issued General Order Number 10, banishing the guerrillas' families from the state. Coupled with the death and injury in the collapse, then banishment of their women, the guerrillas seemed to scream for retaliatory measures. Friday, August 21st, 1863, dawned hot and clear as Quantrill, with 310 men, perpetrated the Lawrence Massacre. In 2 hours, close to 150 male citizens of Lawrence were killed, several only young boys. Not one Lawrence woman was injured. 185 buildings were destroyed. 80 widows and 250 orphans were left crying in the dusty streets. By 9 o'clock, the massacre was over and the guerrillas retreated. The tragedy here and General Order Number 10 were blamed for the Lawrence Massacre. Long and drawn out reading of the sign, but you didn't know that. A lot of people don't. There's a movie called Ride with the Devil, and it's a reenactment of that. And actually, I think it's a pretty good movie. However, I started to notice, and I take a little bit of exception to a lot of these Civil War memorials that have a tinge of the lost cause to them. And a lot of them were put up just like the statues that are controversial as a way to reinforce a racist system. So let's just say there are many of us, myself included, who step back and take a view that these people were not the best of people. Now, it's kind of understandable if you feel something about a cause and you know you're local and these people come along and invade your home. This is crazy. And you know, it's kind of understandable. However, by the end of the Civil War, a lot of these people's true colors came out. They were robbers. They were thieves. They were a lot of people who had PTSD, and of course we didn't have a very good treatment program for that back then. Didn't even know that term existed. And they didn't know anything other than violence, violent existence. And that's how the Wild West sort of became the old Wild West. All the gunfights and stuff. Holdovers of the Civil War. All right, come on, dogs. Very carefully. So, a lot of people would say that Jesse James and his gang were Robin Hoods. But the truth was, they robbed everybody, and they kept the money. They weren't like, they were giving it to their relatives, I guess. So, I'm saying I take a more of a middle position on the whole thing. I don't really take sides. The Jayhawks weren't great. They were a violent, bloody militia too. But the whole situation was horrible. I mean, people would come up in the middle of the night and knock on your door and ask you which side you were on. If you answered wrong, you were dead and your house was burned down and your women and children, your family were homeless. In retaliation to the Lawrence raid, the Union committed another atrocity. They told everybody in the 3 counties bordering Kansas and Missouri, 4 maybe, south of the Missouri River, and George Caleb Bingham, who was forever mad at and hated that General Ewing, because they said it was his building, it was shoddy, and he said, I believe that the Union soldiers did that on purpose as an act of revenge. Put people in a building and then locked them in and then let it collapse on them. But anyway, so in retaliation, the Union troops evacuated all the western counties. If you weren't a friend of theirs, you needed to get out. And then they went in and stole everything. My aforementioned battery died. There's a look back at downtown from here, 16th and Grand. And here's my ever so patient doggies waiting for me, being good. Hey dogs, can you teach that to the children? All right, so to resume what I was saying, the Union troops forced all the people out and burnt down their houses and stole their livestock, everything of value. And there was a lot of resentment for that. And Harry Truman, it's interesting, this area had the divided loyalties. Harry Truman became president of the United States. The Wallace family, who he married into, and he lived in their house, that was actually his mother-in-law's house that he lived in Independence. It's a famous place to visit here. They got Union shields carved in the banisters, and that was to show their loyalty to the Union cause. Well, Harry Truman's family, his kin, as he would say, they were pro-Confederate. And when Harry Truman joined the Army at the beginning of World War I, he joined up pretty much with he was artillery. I'm not sure if he was cavalry, but either way, artillery used horses. And he rode up to visit his mother in Grandview on her property, wearing the uniform, the dress uniform of the United States Army, which was blue, Union blue. And when she saw him riding his horse down their driveway, she about had a heart attack. Brought back horrible memories of when the Union soldiers came, probably maybe 40 years earlier, 50 years earlier, to burn down her property and to terrorize her and all the people around her. And she told Harry Truman to get off her property wearing that uniform and to never, ever visit her wearing that blue uniform. I'm sure he could visit her wearing the olive drab, which became standard. But if you ever look at the American Army and their dress uniform, when they go to formal functions, it is Union blue. And as a matter of fact, the formal dress uniform has a name. It's called Dress Blues. And it's very interesting because you look at the modern Army uniform, And it's not much imagination to see the old blue Civil War uniform in that. It looks very similar. Most people don't see it. They only see the military wearing their olive drab or battle dress uniform. It's only for really formal functions. Anyway, I'm gonna look at this building in recent times. Let me tilt my monitor down so I can see. Recent times, this building, this is the old Kansas City Star building. And it had been the Kansas City Star building forever. And recently it's been, all the newspaper people have moved out. I believe they moved into the new Kansas City Star printing press building. And now they're redeveloping it into mixed use lofts, of course, everything. My phone flipped out, which I use for a monitor. So, and this is something I'm used to seeing in Los Angeles, Church of Scientology building. Now they've had several buildings or several places they've rented, but now they own this building and they've turned it into Scientology. I believe if you look inside, you'll see a big statue of L. Ron Hubbard. I once told somebody I was very interested in collecting at least one document from every major church in the world, and he really took that to heart. And every day I would get something in the mail at work with my name misspelled and everything else like that from the Church of Scientology. I did not know he was a Scientologist when I was saying that to him. After that, I kind of went, I think if I want to collect that stuff, I'll do it on my own. I don't like the... Also, you know, when you visit downtown LA, they're all over there. And it's like visiting Rome in many ways. All right, I got to tilt this down. Here's another view, better view of the Kansas City Star building and the work that's going on there. So anyway, now we're going to walk back west. Oh. And we're going to lose my connection with my phone. I got to be very careful the way I move that. Apparently it's very sensitive. Heading west back towards, this is 18th Street. This is like one of the major east-west streets through the Crossroads now. Forever and ever and ever, 18th Street was kind of a nothing street. On one end you have the 18th and Vine Jazz Historic District, and on the other end the Crossroads Arts District. There was an effort by my friend David Ford and the people at YJ's at Mardi Gras. They would parade west to east from the Crossroads to the Jazz District, and the symbol for their crew was handshaking between the two districts, between the two neighborhoods. There's an east-west divide in Kansas City, kind of a racial divide, and many poorer people, which includes many people in the African American community, live east of Troost in Kansas City. Substandard schools, substandard housing, substandard city services, and west of Troost is where the more affluent people live, and that includes many white people. And you know, they get brand new sidewalks every few years, and there's sewer breaks, and there's a crew ride on it, and the police are friendly, yada yada yada, just like everywhere else, to the shame of this country. So anyway, they'd have a Mardi Gras parade on this street. I don't know if they're going to do it much in the future because YJ's closed, and I don't know what Mr. Ford is doing these days, but he wasn't very happy about the situation with YJ's. And so I don't know if they're going to continue that, but it was a good gesture to see people try and make an effort to. But I don't know, I kind of observed there was a good mix of artists and stuff, but in the group. But I kind of observed there are a lot of people that would like to go and party at 18th and Vine District. When they saw it, they didn't know what was happening. There was an effort. There's a dance, not a dance troupe, but like a parade group, like on the vein of the Cobras, which is sort of a marching band performance group. It does many parades, made up of inner city kids. But these people were from KCK, and they were a part of it too. All right, come on, dogs, come on. Anyway, here's looking up Main Street towards downtown. And when I talked about all those old hotels and stuff, that's them down there basically. Let me zoom in on that. Anyway, that story I said about my dad, I believe that's where he stayed, was down there, just north of Union Station. And Pendergast headquarters is down there somewhere, about 2 blocks down. Again, I apologize for this wind. And it's just interesting. We must finish our walk. And we're walking right next to the old TWA headquarters. It's now being leased to, I don't believe they own it, but being leased to an advertising firm. And pretty much in the heart of the Crossroads. Now, the situation has hit this area pretty hard too. It's known for its first Friday of every month. All the galleries open, the streets just packed with people. Situation has sort of dulled that, I think. And also the inevitable, whenever you have a large gathering, some crummy people in the city decide to show up. And there was violence at one of the later events. They killed an innocent woman. So I think they're trying to refigure the security of the whole deal. Anyway, we're back on Baltimore. And looking down towards Jim Leedy's gallery down there, about 4 or 5 blocks. And as we cross, whoops, hold on, dogs, against the light, all of a sudden there was a car. KU, home of the jaywalks. But as we cross, look towards downtown. And that'll wrap up this journey as I am back at my car in front of the Bower. Now, the guy who runs the Bower has a long history with this city. His name is Jeff Owen. And that wind is really tough. And he now runs this. And his roots with this city go way back. There he is. How's it going? I was just talking about you. Your roots with the city.
Yeah.
What do you do with this building? Are you the owner or just the caretaker? Sorry, I'm like putting you on the spot.
A little bit of both. This is an art center.
Yeah. And you know Marion Trezzolo, and you were the carpenter, the main carpenter for the River Key.
Yeah, blacksmith is what it was.
Blacksmith?
Yeah.
And you remember the River Key War? I didn't talk about that.
Oh yeah, very clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someday I'd like to talk to you about that stuff.
No problem at all.
All right.
Anytime.
I'm doing a 4K walking tour for YouTube.
All right, that sounds great.
All right. Thank you very much for talking to me. Anyway. Don't know if you can hear any of that, so I'm wearing the mic, which makes a lot of sense. But anyway, that was Jeff Owen. I was just talking about him, and I run right into him. And he's a nice, approachable guy, and so I have to do something with him, you know, talk about. Anyway, that's my journey for today. So, woohoo!